All right, what is up, folks? Welcome back to another episode of the Help Me Understand podcast. I'm your host, Coach JK McLeod, and welcome to another fitness and nutrition, focused episode of Help Me Understand. This is typically what we do here on Tuesdays. So if you're new to the Help Me Understand podcast, first, thank you for choosing to press play. I know that you have other podcasts that you could be listening to right now. Maybe they're in your queue. So I just appreciate the fact that you chose to press play on the Help Me Understand podcast. And speaking of podcasts being in your queue, if you're not already subscribed to the show, I would really appreciate it if you would add the Help Me Understand podcast, this very podcast that you're listening to your weekly listens. So without further delay, let's go ahead and jump into today's episode. Again, on Tuesdays, typically our episodes are going to be more fitness and nutrition. I call it fitness and nutrition adjacent or fitness and nutrition focused. And today is no different. Today, I want to do a bit of a breakdown, whether you consider it sharing just my perspective or my opinion, and maybe even a little bit of advice on this, the idea, the belief that traveling specifically causes weight gain. And let me give you a scenario, a couple of scenarios where this is that I've observed recently. So one would be, and this is just one example out of many that I've worked through with folks over a number of years, having been in the fitness and nutrition coaching space for the better part of 10 years at this point. So the one would be having a conversation with someone who has been traveling, maybe travels fairly often, especially when it's flying, a lot of flying travel or flight focused travel, coming back, and then they're finding that the scale is up and it's up for a couple of days, whatever it may be. And they reach out because they just feel like, man, I'm just kind of concerned because I feel like I did everything right, whatever that may mean, while I was traveling, felt like I didn't really go crazy, that sort of thing. I kept most of my normal habits. So I'm not sure what the deal is. Like, why do I always gain weight when I travel? So that's scenario A, we'll call it. And then scenario B that came across my feed, like literally my algorithm. I was watching a YouTube video from a content creator, and what he's really focused on with a particular series that he's doing right now, and I can't remember the exact name of the content creator, but what he's focused on right now is weight loss. And so what he will do is upload an updated video, update. He'll upload an update video each month to check in with his community and let folks know, hey, here's how things are going. And on a recent update that he had posted that his weight had gone up. I think it was like 3 pounds. He said something along the lines of gaining 3 pounds or something like that, and attributed, or actually I should say, he talked about that and also mentioned that he had traveled. He's on the West Coast and had traveled to the Midwest for a few days, I believe it was, and then flown back. And what I thought was interesting is that in the comments, a decent amount of people jumped in from the standpoint of where they felt like was encouraging to let him know, hey, it's not that big of a deal. When you travel, you gain weight. So I was kind of noticing this theme between both my personal experience in working with clients and then also in reading some of these comments. And quite often, or quite honestly, this is something that I'll notice just in real life too. So not just online, but IRL, as we call it, in real life, that's a very common response or piece of feedback or an opinion that somebody will share. If somebody says like, yeah, I was traveling and just, I just was a lot of flying around and I gained weight, and people, under the assumption that they're being helpful, will immediately say, well, traveling does cause weight gain. So I actually want to break that down for this particular episode. So the first thing that I'm going to do here is I want to share with you my perspective, just flat out. I'll say it right off the bat, that there's not necessarily a specific belief that I would co-sign that specifically says, hey, traveling causes weight gain. In fact, I would say the opposite. It's not specifically that traveling itself causes weight gain. It ideally, or most of the time, it's typically going to be behavior changes during the travel that will cause the weight gain itself. What I will typically find is that when folks have disrupted routines around their meals, around movement, and really a lot of times around their sleep, that tends to lead to different outcomes. So the issue tends to be more of an issue of adaptation to a new environment, not specifically the trip itself. So this is the piece that I'm just going to lay out there flat out, that it's not the travel itself. It's really how our habits tend to shift when our environment changes. Now, I don't have the episode number in front of me. I did do an episode, I want to say maybe about within the last couple of months or so, about some habits that I try to stay consistent with on longer road trips that I'll go on. Myself and or my wife and my daughter, we typically will drive between Illinois and Alabama a few times per year, just based on where she's in school and also my parents live. So I've got a decent amount of learned experience with a 600-ish mile each way road trip. So if you are interested in like specifics around how I handle things, what I try to stay consistent with, and maybe that will spark some ideas for you, then you can go back to listen to that particular episode. Now, first, let me start off by saying that there is a kernel of, or a nugget of information that perhaps does fly in the face of my argument that it's not the travel itself that causes the weight gain. So something that I will bring to your attention here for those who are listening is that there are definitely instances where you can feel more puffy or you feel more bloated after a flight. So specifically after flying. And that really has more to do with the fact that it's a combination of prolonged inactivity, because you tend to be seated, hopefully, when you're on the plane more often than not, and also having that lower cabin pressure. So when you really combine those particular things, you've got inactivity, which is going to make it harder for blood and fluids to really circulate back up from your legs, because that's typically where what I've heard from folks where they tend to kind of notice things is they feel like puffier and they feel like their legs are swollen, or like their feet are swollen, feel like shoes are fitting a bit tighter. What happens is it makes it harder for those fluids to circulate back up from the legs against gravity. And then also you've got your lower air pressure inside of the cabin, and that can make circulation a bit more difficult. Also keep in mind that with the way that airplane cabins are typically are kept, it typically tends to be more dry cabin air, and that can basically cause your blood vessels to constrict. So all of those different pieces going together certainly can contribute to this feeling, or even the actual fact that you may feel a bit puffier, you may feel a bit bloated. And that would be, again, this is just from experience that people have shared with me, this being more in their legs and specifically like thinking about their feet. So it tends to be, again, more an issue of you're inside an airplane cabin, so you've got lower air pressure. There's also that inactivity. You're in that seated position. You've got dehydration, which tends to happen if you're someone who also, and this is where we'll kind of get into habits, if you're someone who also tends to consume alcohol during flights, then that can certainly contribute to issues also, because you're already in an area of dry cabin air. So dehydration can be a very, very real thing. And then when you're adding alcohol on top of that, yeah, that can be an issue. So that's my one, like, okay, I'll give you that one if that's what we're specifically talking about. More often than not, the crowd that I'm going to be working with and speaking to, the pieces that we're discussing are not specifically related to puffy or swollen legs. So I'll just go ahead and put that one to the side. Okay, so now let's talk about the pieces that I believe are at play when we are really breaking down the idea that traveling, and let's even make it specific to, well, no, I won't make it specific to flying. So let's say that traveling really causes weight gain. So the first factor that I want you to consider is that your daily energy expenditure, your TDEE, your total daily energy expenditure, your overall energy balance, like that stuff matters whether you are at home or on the road. It can be very, very easy for your total daily energy expenditure to be altered while you're traveling. You've got things like your overall daily activity level, your food intake, whether that be quantity and or quality. I'll get into that a little bit later. And also your sleep patterns. those things tend to shift. So if you have listened to previous episodes, you may have heard me reference the three basically pillars of habits. It's eat well, sleep enough, exercise regularly. So those particular habits, when you take those things on the road, those things likely will be different than what they are at home. So do keep that in mind. You may have some trips that may increase your steps or your activity depending on what's going on. And then you may have others that limit movement. I work with a host of different clients, some who primarily will travel mostly for pleasure, some who primarily will travel mostly for work, and then many of them, it's a combination of the two. I've worked with folks before and currently work with people who it seems like they're on a trip at least maybe 1 week out of the month, like a total of, let's say, 7 to 10 days out of the month. They're typically flying somewhere back and forth. And so these are very real things that definitely come up. Something to also consider when it comes to really thinking about your energy balance on the road is that your caloric intake, so the amount of food that you're eating, will typically be up. And that tends to be due to things like convenient food, got more social meals. So especially if you're traveling for pleasure, or actually I would say just as much from a business standpoint too. I've got folks who travel quite a bit to entertain clients, or they themselves are in the decision-making chair. So they're being entertained and wined and dined, like literally wined and dined by vendors who want them to sign up for their particular products, whatever it may be. So keeping those things in mind, those things definitely will affect your caloric intake. And there often is a lot less structure on the road than you will have at home. So with my first point here, keep in mind that energy balance matters no matter what. I'm not telling you that you need to restrict. What I'm just saying is before we automatically say, okay, well, it's because of travel that weight goes up. So it's because I was on a train, plane, or automobile or boat or whatever it might be, that automatically means that my weight is going up. Well, not so fast, my friend. Like it may actually be the things that you're doing during those particular periods of time. So at the end of the day, your weight change is typically going to come down to an energy balance, and travel, it really simply just changes both sides of that particular equation. All right, so now let's get to sleep. So the role of sleep in travel, extremely important. And even more specifically, your circadian rhythm, which is in layman's terms, understanding where your energy increases, where it plateaus, and where it decreases. So what is that flow for you? And man, that is likely one of the, if not the main thing that will take, I don't know if I'm going to say the biggest hit. I will say it will be the most affected typically by travel. So if you're traveling different time zones, you can have jet lag, and then you're sleeping in an unfamiliar place, or you're sleeping somewhere where it's just not your own, it's not your own bed, you know? So that can certainly lead to poor sleep. Those are both pieces. So when you think about things like jet lag and then also thinking about poor sleep, those particular things can have an effect on what we're going to call your hunger hormones, which are ghrelin and leptin. They are two specific hunger hormones. Ghrelin is basically the hormone that signals, hey, we are hungry. And the way that I remember that is ghrelin, grr. So grr, if your stomach starts growling, that's your hunger hormone. So potentially a inadequate sleep, whether that be quality and or quantity or some combination of the two, can increase that ghrelin hormone a little bit out of whack. And so you become hungry, or being sent more hunger signals. Then the other hormone that we referenced is leptin. So leptin is what we call your satiety hormone. That's the hormone that sends the signal, okay, we are full and we're good to go. We can stop now. Now, keep in mind also that with fatigue through poor sleep, whether again, we're talking quantity or quality, that can really affect your decision making, which then many times can lead to changing the quality of the majority, let's say, of the food that you're consuming. So keeping that in mind, also understand that irregular sleep is probably going to disrupt your digestion and your recovery, which then in turn impacts your metabolism. So again, when we're quick to say, well, during travel, your weight goes up, It's the habits that are that are present or not present, I guess whichever way you want to look at it, during the travel itself that still make an impact. Like those things still matter. They still get a say in this entire process. So we've talked about overall energy balance. Now we're talking sleep and really just wrapping this part up. When your sleep just starts to fall apart, and again, that can be either the quantity and or the quality. Typically then in relation to that, there's definitely a link with then your appetite control and then just your overall ability to recover from the activities that you're doing. Those things can definitely be affected. Something else that I jotted down here is the difference in when you're traveling, where sometimes you're eating for experience versus eating for fuel. So I will definitely say that for myself, when I travel, and I've got a few friends that also I know would emphatically co-sign if they happen to be listening to this. Sometimes I've got that mindset of like, well, this is something that I only get access to when I'm in this particular spot. Like only when I go to my mom's house can I have mom's spaghetti. Shout out Eminem. Only when I'm in Alabama do I get access for getting this specific like type of peach cobbler that I really like. So that whole like, man, I might never get to eat this again mindset definitely will drive some decisions where I'm eating more for the experience versus thinking, okay, well, this is going to be a great fuel for tomorrow's training session. A lot of times, just the cultural and social eating becomes a bit less mindful. It doesn't necessarily, not even going to say necessarily, I am not intending to say that that is bad. What I'm intending to do is continue throughout this entire episode to really just bring to the forefront or bring to the light the things that do factor in to the scale going up, down, sideways, wherever it may go, versus just saying, well, it's because you traveled, and then we all of a sudden just like, okay, well, that's why. That's not, I just don't believe that that's the case. So you can definitely experience great meals, great times with friends, family, whoever it may be, without just absolutely letting like I'm in vacation mode completely run the entire show. So just something to consider there. All right. And then the last thing that I jotted down is the importance of understanding what your movement habits look like when you travel. So depending on what you've got going on, how you're traveling, what you're doing when you get to your destination, travel can either decrease or increase your movement, just really depending on the context of the trip that you're on. If you've got long flights, you've got car rides, that typically is going to equal more sedentary periods than you maybe would normally have. If you are going to sightseeing, if you're going to go see particular, national monuments, if you're going hiking, doing things like that, exploring new cities, those are things that tend to lead to higher step counts. So you may find that the method or the mode in which you travel may bring your activity down. However, maybe there's an increase in activity once you get to your destination. So that's something to consider also. Something that I strongly recommend, and this I believe this is part of the episode that I did a while back around just habits that I take on the road with me, is just making sure that you're keeping in some sort of small, realistic movement anchor, whether it's short walks at rest stops, walking for 10 minutes right when you get to your destination, doing shorter workouts, doing body weight workouts, whatever it may be. Those are things that can really help maintain overall consistency with movement. So the idea that travel automatically equals not moving at all doesn't necessarily have to be true. I can think of one client that I work with in particular who I believe at this point she's probably traveling once every 4 to 5 weeks. She's on about a 4 to 5 day trip. It's a different one than the other one I was talking about. I'm realizing as I'm going through this how many of my clients travel. But with this particular client, most of her trips are within the state that she lives. So she typically is driving to those places and then sitting in conference rooms or boardrooms for a long period of time. So particular habits that she has in order to maintain movement is walking just about everywhere that she can possibly go. So walking after a meal, she's in a city where they're traveling as a group, and or the environment is deemed to be pretty safe, and walking to and from particular destinations, taking some time during breaks instead of just kind of standing around, taking some time to walk around the facility, the hotel, things like that. So there are definitely ways to still make sure that you're getting some movement in so that you don't have to just assume that, well, travel equals weight gain. So at this point, I'm going to start to wrap up because I think hopefully I've driven home my point pretty well and my perspective that just really travel doesn't have to equal that all of a sudden you've gained weight. And even though you may have somebody who is feeling like they're being helpful by saying, hey, don't worry, like the scale went up and that's just because you traveled, really take some time. While that's nice and it's certainly well meaning, I don't know that it necessarily actually addresses or helps you take, in my opinion, it doesn't help you take responsibility for what your habits are during that particular time. I am in no way or shape or form saying that the scale going up is bad and that means that you did bad things or that you failed your trip. Far from. It depends on what your priorities and what your goals were. If your goal and your priority is not to have the scale go up while you're on vacation, that is a separate conversation that, as your coach, we would likely be having ahead of time, because I don't know a whole lot of people who are like, hey, for example, my main thing that I want to accomplish on this cruise to the Bahamas is to make sure that the scale doesn't go up. Like, that's the main thing I want. Yeah, I know my friends are going to be there. Yeah, I know I'm with my partner, but as long as the scale didn't go up, that's the main thing. I don't know a whole lot of folks that I know of who that is the main priority. So just something to keep in mind. Your habits, find a way. Can you find a way? Or how can you find a way? Let's empower you. How can you find a way to make your habits that you have portable so that you don't have to buy into the belief that travel automatically equals that you did something wrong because the scale went up? Okay. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. So thank you, as always, for choosing to press play on the Help Me Understand podcast. I appreciate you listening to this episode. Thank you. Take care, and I'll talk to you next time.